In this class, I want to talk about production. Now, this is an important topic because it leads on to costs, and costs inevitably lead on to the company or firms, which in turn leads on to markets. So it gives us a stepping stone in the whole economics picture. But as economists, we have a particular perspective, and we need to deal with this perspective. So I'm going to introduce it to you here. For a start, production involves the transformation of inputs into outputs. That's all production is. It's just transformation of inputs into outputs. We take some inputs and we convert them into outputs. The production of physical commodities involve a chain of production that may ultimately be tracked or traced back to the exploitation and processing of raw materials. So what we're saying in this slide is that as long as we're dealing with physical commodities, we can trace it back to raw materials, because the physical commodities have to come from nature. They have to come from somewhere. If you're building a house, you have to have raw materials. Those raw materials come from nature. It depends on the nature of the product being produced. But the production of physical commodities involves that sort of chain. If it's a service, of course, it's different. But we'll talk about services elsewhere. Now let's look at the inputs in production. The inputs are also known as the factors of production. And these are everything that go into the production process. And I will see in a moment, but I'm going to preempt it here for a second. There are 4 factors of production: land, labour, capital, and entrepreneurship. And I'll be doing those in a few seconds. But I want to introduce this idea that inputs are important, and there are 4 of them. We classify them as 4. There are issues about the classification, there are problems and so on, but so be it. So they're divided into 4 categories: land, labour, capital, and entrepreneurship. Now, labour often involves different types of skills. That's understandable. People have different skills, and particular jobs or particular tasks require particular types of skill. Land is premises and materials, as well as what we classically understand to be land, fields and farms and so on, but it's also premises and materials. So the materials are classified as land. They come from nature. So it's land. Capital, well, capital is machinery and equipment. You could say that capital and land are related because capital is just processed land. Take the materials from the land and process them, they could become capital. For example, if you dig up copper on your land and you process it, you could use the copper for making a machine or adding it to some production process. So we've got 3 factors of production that we can readily relate to. Entrepreneurship is really the new one on the block. Entrepreneurship is alertness to profit opportunities. That's all entrepreneurship is. Someone who is alert, who is aware of profit opportunities, and who will then set out to capture those profit opportunities. It turns out that entrepreneurship is critically important. If we don't have the entrepreneur, we're just going to end up with labour, land, and capital. Nothing's going to happen. They're going to sit there. They won't do anything. We need some sort of agent, the entrepreneur, to come along and organise them and bring them to market and satisfy wants that the customers have. If without the entrepreneur, nothing happens. So the entrepreneur is rewarded by profits. So the incentive for the entrepreneur is profit. But we need entrepreneurs to get new products. We need people's imagination to get new products. So in this sense, economics becomes a little strange. But nonetheless, we have to tell the truth. And the truth is that nearly everything you see is the product of someone's imagination. And that someone is the entrepreneur. That someone had to second guess you, that you will buy the product. They will make it, they will package it in a certain way, they'll put it for sale, and you will buy it. They have to do all of it. If they get it wrong, they will lose. And you will not feel sorry for them. Chances are. No one feels sorry for them. They just made a mistake. That's their problem. But if they get it right, they will make a profit. And then sometimes we get envious. We say it's not fair. They've got so many millions of pounds and billions and so on. But we didn't do it. They did it. That's a controversial idea, but it's one that we have to confront and we will talk about again, usually in seminars, and usually it's quite a heated discussion. Now, types of production. Well, we've got primary, secondary, and tertiary. Tertiary means the third type. Primary is extractive. So fisheries, agriculture, mining, these are extractive. We're taking things from nature. That's primary. But in a way, we take everything from nature. We take mines, take copper, and take metals out of the land. And if we don't take them out of the land, we don't get them anywhere else. So we take them out and then we process them. That's the secondary. It's converting something from the primary sector that we've got in the primary sector, converting it so we can use it. The primary sector could be agriculture. We produce grain. That's what farmers produce, one of the things farmers produce. And in the secondary sector, mills and factories and so on will take the grain and process it into bread. And then the tertiary sector is the service sector that enables all of this to work. So we need accountants, and we need solicitors, and we need experts, consultants, and so on. These are the tertiary sector, the third level. But they're necessary, as is the secondary sector, as is the primary sector. Without the three sectors, we don't get the products that we want. So there's no point in fighting it. This is what we're after. Now, extensiveness and complexity. Well, extensiveness means the length of the production process, from the primary product to the final one. How long is that process? Sometimes it can be very long. We have to extract metals in some part of the world, and then we have to process the metals and smelt them or whatever, and put them on ships and take them to someplace else where they're further processed, and eventually we get a car. That's how extensive the production process is. We can also classify it by complexity. Sometimes it involves technology, perhaps advanced technology. And that makes the production process complex. So extensive, how long is it? And complexity, how complicated is it? Complexity means the type of technology used in the process. Now, there are different types of output. We've got the final and the intermediate output. And there's an element of arbitrariness involved in this distinction. The final output is what we were after. As consumers, what we want is the final one. We don't want to go to a shop and buy a car that doesn't have any wheels or doesn't have an engine or whatever. We don't want that. We want a car, one that works. So we're after the final product. We're not after the intermediate product. We don't want the salesman to say, look, we've got a lovely car, but it's not completed yet. It doesn't have any wheels and it doesn't have an engine. But really, it looks really good. That's no good to us. At what point does it become final? And at what point is it intermediate? There must be a transition from intermediate to final. It depends on what the entrepreneur determines as the final product. What is the product that's going to sell in the market? So the car might be produced and it's functional, but we don't buy it because it doesn't look nice. So maybe there's an aesthetic that the entrepreneur is bringing to the whole process and making the car look attractive. So still a car, but now it's an attractive car, so we're interested in buying it. There are production feedbacks in the production system we have to be aware of as well. The example I give here is that we need metal to produce a car, but we need cars to produce the metal. Cars are used to transport sales executives and generally facilitate the production process. So the car industry will use metal, but the car industry will use cars within the car industry. So sometimes we have production process feedbacks that the output of the industry is used by itself. Another example would be coal mining. Sometimes coal mining may use engines that are fueled, old-fashioned one, this one, but you see it in films sometimes. The coal industry might have a machine that's pumping out water out of the mines, let's say, but the machine is heated up by coal. So the output of the coal industry, or the coal mine in that case, is used to produce coal. So there's a feedback. It's using its own output. Sometimes there are production feedbacks, and perhaps we can come up with a better list than I've got here. We'll talk about that in the class as well. In the context of what I got here, of course, the cars are intermediate output as opposed to their usual role of satisfying the final demand. That's all I'm trying to say. Now, goods and services. Well, goods may be viewed as tangible output. They're tactile. You can touch goods, generally speaking. Services are not. We can't physically touch a service. The service of a solicitor is the advice you get from the solicitor. Well, that's advice. It's not tactile. You can't touch it. It's not like producing a car. You can walk out and put your hand on the car. You can feel the car. You can't feel the advice. So goods can be intangible. They could be tangible or intangible. And as I say here, the solicitor provides an intermediate service to industry, whereas a waiter provides a final service to a customer in a restaurant. Still a service, but the waiter provides a final service. The solicitor provides an intermediate one. Generally speaking, the solicitor offers advice to a company: do this, don't do that, be careful about that. That's intermediate service. The waiter, on the other hand, is given a final service to the customer. So we can also classify services as intermediate or final. Now, output. Well, the objective of any productive process is the satisfaction of wants. Now, through market signals and alertness. Alertness is very important because we talk about that in the context of the entrepreneur. But in the context here, the entrepreneur emerges to organize production and thereby make a profit and at the same time satisfy wants. You see, the entrepreneur has been promoted over the years. In old-fashioned economics texts, there were three factors of production: land, labour and capital. Now entrepreneurship has been added because we now recognise that with land, labour and capital, they can just sit there. Nothing happens. It's just land, and there's labour, and there's capital, and there's nothing happening. We need someone to organise it. We need someone to make the product, to design the product, to market the product, to price the product. to give after sales service and so on. That person is the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur is rewarded by profit. So the motivation for the entrepreneur is profit. The entrepreneur gets profit. Wants are satisfied by the production of the final output. Generally speaking, we don't go to the shop to buy something that's half made. If you go to buy a car and the engine's missing, you don't buy it. You wait for the engine to be put in and the car to be perfect. Then you buy the car. You don't buy it if it doesn't have any wheels or no engine or whatever. You don't do that. You just wait for the car to be complete and then we buy it. So we're interested in the final output. Production of wants. Well, this function is performed primarily by the final output. We're only happy when we get the final output. But sometimes in production, people enjoy working. They get a psychic satisfaction from working. So sometimes they get final satisfaction out of the work effort. And in this case, the work effort, which is an intermediate output, intermediate in the sense we're taking raw materials, converting them into something we're going to buy. That process of converting them, that's intermediate. It's in between being a raw material and being a final product. But that process of making it is also, it satisfies a want. People want to work. People want to be engaged in something, and something productive, something useful. So there is an outcome in itself being involved in the production process. And that's more of an area for human resource management. HR people will explore that in much more detail. And that's a part of our course as well, of course. And HR people will look at that in more detail. As indeed, I collaborate with them in looking at it as well. It's an important issue in economics as in human resource management. The relationship between the number of inputs to output is a measure of efficiency in the production process. Well, that should be obvious. If it takes a lot of people to make something, and the same thing can be made with fewer people, then the first lot were inefficient. Efficiency is really the number of, let's say, workers it takes to build something. And if that number can be reduced, the number of workers can be reduced, then the existing workers, the ones left, are being more efficient. And this is a debate that's often raised in the media. We think of, is it fair that a company is closing its plant, or it's not fair that workers are being replaced? And sure, there are issues there about training and redeployment and so on that the HR parts of our course will explore. But in terms of economics, we can see efficiency, well, it's getting the output with the most efficient use of inputs. That's the economic line. We have to disagree with the whole economic paradigm if we're going to change that. There may be several ways of producing a given output, depending on the technology used. We can imagine producing bread in a very primitive way. If you go to look at historic buildings from the 1700s or the 1800s, they produce bread in a very basic fashion in the kitchen, perhaps, of the house. And that was an art. And it's laudable. It's good. And we look back at that, sometimes we look back at it as a nice period of history. But nowadays, we tend to go to a bakery or we go to a supermarket and buy bread, where the supermarket may have an in-house bakery. There are three main types of efficiency: technical, cost, economic, and allocative. Now, the technical efficiency is getting things done as efficiently as possible. Cost efficiency is getting them done at the least cost. Economic efficiency is the overall efficiency of the productive unit, the business, the firm, whatever we want to call it. It's the economic efficiency of the market to deliver the products to the consumer. And that overlaps with the allocative efficiency, which is getting the pricing and getting the output and the distribution system to allocate all the functions of production and all the functions of distribution, getting them to allocate these efficiently. So we have different types of efficiency, and these will be the subject matter of different classes. So I'm not going into them in great detail, as you've probably worked out on this one. They are simply too big for one class. But these are enjoyable topics for the future. Now, the theory of market supply. Well, production and costs, we can lump those together. They are part and parcel of the same thing in terms of economics. There are issues about production, the law of diminishing returns, or sometimes some very precise economists might say the law of eventual diminishing marginal physical productivity. I mean, wow. Normally we say the law of diminishing returns. And we talk about production, and we can talk about inputs and outputs and technical side of production and so on. And that's the subject matter of other videos, not here. Likewise, the theory of costs. Costs are dependent upon production, as you would expect. But again, we're not going to get too heavily involved in that here. However, what we will do is talk here about what we call a production function. Now, this is frightening to many of you, I'm sure, where you're thinking, economics has got this crazy reputation for using mathematics and so on. In fact, I'm not using mathematics. I'm using symbols here. I'm just using some symbols to explain something. And this is efficient. This is what happens in economics. We write it down like this, and we read it as something different. It's not mathematical. This is called an implicit function. Implicit means, look, I'm saying output, Q, depends on, if I'm going to read it across, I'll put the cursor on here. That's the quantity of output. It depends on. That F means depends on. That's all we need to know. F depends on. So you can write down the F equals depends on. It's in English. So output depends on L, labour, K, capital. Capital is spelt wrongly, but never mind. It's what economists do. K for capital. We can't use C for capital because C is cost. It's been used up. So K for capital, LD, land, just to make it different to labour. So labour, capital machines and all that sort of thing. Maybe technology. Land, natural resources. Not just land, you look out, but anything natural. Mining is land. Fishing is land. I know that sounds a bit crazy, but it's natural. Anything that's natural and extractive, we're taking from nature. Anything we're taking from nature, we call land. We just want to make it short. But we know what we mean. So it's fisheries is land. I know it sounds a little crazy. And E for entrepreneurship. You see, having labour, capital and land is no good without the entrepreneur. They just sit there. They don't do anything. We need somebody to organise them, the entrepreneur, someone to put them all together, to make a product that the consumer wants, deliver the product at the price the consumer can pay. And if that happens, we have an entrepreneur on our hands. E for entrepreneur. We can also look at time periods. Now, time periods in economics, well, we've got two, or sometimes people say we've got three, but we certainly got two. As to whether we've got three or not, we have to discuss that at some other stage. We'll start with the short run. The short run, now we'll write this down here as quantity of output depends on, that's symbol again, depends on, that's all just English, depends on labour. We're holding capital, land and entrepreneurship constant. You'll see we've cut it off here. We've put the bracket just over at this point here. So what's happened to capital, land and entrepreneurship? Well, we're holding those constant. If we do that, we have to do it explicitly. We have to tell everybody we're holding things constant here. So we use this Latin expression, ceteris paribus. In other words, everything else being constant. That's the translation we're going to use. Ceteris paribus, everything else being constant. Please note it. We use it all the time in economics. It's used a lot. Okay, so this may be written as that, ceteris paribus. If we vary the amount of labour only, we hold capital, land and entrepreneurship constant, then we're in the short run. If we're holding something constant, it's short run. In the long run, everything is variable. So we have two time periods in economics, short run and long run. Short run means something is constant. Now, the definitions I'm giving you here are really related to what we call microeconomics. In macroeconomics, and if you look at the financial news on television and so on, they talk about days and months and years, calendar time. We're not talking about calendar time here. We're talking about the fixity of the factors of production. We define time in terms of whether a factor of production is fixed or a variable. So we don't have days and months and years. We have time in terms of the fixity of the factors of production. If labour is fixed, that's the amount of labour we have, with no more, no less, that's the amount, then it's fixed. That's short run. So now we're operating in the short run. If everything is variable, long run. So in the long run, we say all factors of production are variable. Everything's variable. We note here, and this is very important, we're not talking about calendar time. We're not talking about chronology. We're not talking about minutes and hours and days and years, and we're talking about the fixity of the factors of production. Short run, we're fixed. That's what we have to work with. Long run, everything's variable. So that's our distinction. We have two time periods, short run and a long run. In some textbooks you see the very long run, and economists just, add bits and pieces from time to time, but we will, in fact, let's have a look at it. The long run. This is a period long enough for all the inputs of factors of production to be varied, but technology remains constant. We say in the long run, all factors of production are variable. And we say the short run and the long run are not measured in days and hours and years, no calendar time. We don't use calendar time. We use the fixity of the factors of production. Is it fixed or is it not? If it's fixed, short run. If it's variable, long run. That's our definition. Richard Lipsey introduced a very long run, a period over which technology may change. This period will pick up the impact of research and development. Useful contribution, but I said we will broadly stick with the short and the long run to try and keep it under control. And that's all we're going to deal with in this class. So let's leave it there. We can pick it up again in seminars and in other situations. But this is a very important class. Go over it several times, have a good look at it, and make your own notes. And any issues that you don't follow or understand, please bring them up and we will try and deal with them. Not on YouTube. We're in the classes. That's where we deal with it. We don't actually check YouTube very often. Maybe we should, but it's better, more efficient if you bring it up in the classes. Let's leave it there. Say thank you for watching.